The Crucible was written in 1953, and this was a time almost right after post-World War II. And World War II took place from 1939 to 1945. And after World War II, there was a very tense and judgmental political climate around that time. And in that time, in the 1950s, there was a man named Joseph McCarthy. Now, this man is very important. One, because Arthur Miller wrote his book about McCarthy's principles and what was going on at the time of McCarthy. And two, because his concept of witch hunts is basically what correctly portrays the whole plot of the Crucible. So before I get into the actual plot of it, I want to talk about something else. So the whole idea of the Crucible is basically you're accusing random people who really, they have nothing to do with what you're accusing them of. For example, Joseph McCarthy accused the American military of communism. Now remember, World War II was a war between the US and the Soviet Union over communism, and US was anti-communism. So how could the US military be communists? So that's where Joseph McCarthy took it way too far. So he got put into trial and he lost his job, and it went pretty bad for him. And he also had a blacklist of Hollywood actors, and he accused them of being communists. So he is, I would say, his character is portrayed as Abigail Williams, and I will talk about Abigail later. There's quite a lot to talk about her. But besides Joseph McCarthy, there's a lot of other stuff that has to do with stereotypes, or like people you randomly accuse, or people inferior to you that you can kind of take advantage of. Well, number one, I think the biggest one we can think of, like right on top of our head, is slavery. Like, you can just accuse the black people of being the one who first had the disease, or being the one who stole. And even right now, like, white policemen just shoot like random black men because they think they stole the bike, when actually it was their bike. And then the white man has like no punishment for it. Like, what is that? Like, I just don't understand that kind of community. That's why I was getting pretty riled up when I was reading this, because it kind of gets you mad. But, oh, and another example is post 9/11. Now, 9/11 was a very, very tragic event, right? But because of that, Bush made something called the Patriot Acts. And this act went like, it kind of infuriated a lot of people. So basically what this act allowed to do is it basically allowed the government to infringe our privacy rights. It allowed them to search through our emails. It allowed them to record phone calls, look at our messages, look at our gallery. Basically everything that is connected to the internet, or something that we indirectly send to someone, even if it's like literally mail packages, they could search through that because they think you're a terrorist. So let's say you're doing a project, right? And I'm doing a project about the Syrian refugees. So if the Patriot Act was still super kind of crucial right now, which it isn't because of all the controversy it caused, but if it was super like in the system, I would probably get arrested for doing my project. Now that becomes a very huge issue. Now, why is that? Well, obviously it infringes our Fourth Amendment rights. Our Fourth Amendment tells us that we have protection from searches or seizures without due reasoning. But that is not a good reason to think I'm a terrorist for doing my project. See what I'm saying? And that will be the central idea of the Crucible. Now, the Crucible has a lot of characters, and not just a lot of minor characters. Almost everyone included in this book is very, very important. So it's going to take a long time for me to explain all of the characters, but I will try my best. So we have two reverends in this town. Well, not just two, but the two of the important ones, Reverend Parris and Reverend Hale. So Reverend Parris is the prime minister of the Salem Church. And the reason why this is important is because at this time, well, in this setting, Salem was based on a theocracy. So that's basically when church and state combine, right? And So God was the ruler. Now, what's the problem with that? He's always spiritually with us, but is he actually there? No. So he can't be the one actually ruling. So the problem with theocracy was that the church became in power, and that became an economical issue, a social issue, and a political issue, and people hated it, which is why there's not a lot of theocracy now. So, but at the time of theocracy, basically Reverend Parris was like the top guy. He was like the bag of chips. And he's very arrogant, and he cares about his honor more than what's right, more than honesty, because he's a reverend. He's not a judge. He's not a lawyer. He doesn't care about what's right. He cares about what's good for him, what's good for his family, what's good for his name, what's good for his honor. And that's what he wants to protect. Now, and then there's Reverend Hale. And Reverend Hale is also a minister, not the prime minister, but he's also a very important minister. And he is very arrogant. And he's that kind of kid that goes around telling everyone that they're sad that they got a 98 on the math test. He's that kid. And there's this really funny quote towards when Reverend Hale actually appears. And that you'll have to find that for yourself. But you'll see he's a very cocky personality. But towards the end of the story, you will start to like Reverend Hale a little bit more. And I feel like a lot of people hate Reverend Parris. So, in Reverend Parris's family, there are, well, obviously a lot of people, but the only people that actually matter are Betty Parris, and Abigail. So Abigail Williams is basically the antagonist of the story. Now, why did I put quotes on that? I will explain that later because it's a very big controversial issue. So Abigail Williams is Parris's niece, and what she did was, to summarize it all in a few seconds, she basically caused the whole plot of this book. And that's all I'm going to say for now. Now, Betty Parris, she's one of Abigail's friends. She's 10 years old, and I guess at that time they played with like 10-year-old like big sisters, 10-year-old little sisters. I mean, not for me to judge, right? So Abigail and Betty were friends. Well, friends. And Abigail actually had a group of girls that she kind of manipulated. So if there was like the squad, she was like the head of the squad, and she was like the popular one. She was like the one in charge, the one telling everyone to do everything. And trust me, I have one of those friends too. Anyways, so at the beginning of the play, Betty is lying in bed unconscious. And the problem with that is the night before, Abigail and the girls were dancing. Now, what's the problem with dancing? Like, they're just dancing, like, woohoo, party. But it wasn't that kind of dancing. There's this girl named Mercy Lewis, and she is also one of Abigail's friend, crew, squad people. And she was naked. She was dancing naked, and Abigail drank blood. And now you might think, oh, this is kind of weird, like, what kind of party is this? It's not a party, it's actually a ritual. So, actually, before I explain who Tituba is, I will explain to you Abigail's love of her life. So, Abigail Williams is in love, in deep love with this farmer named John Proctor. Now, it's okay to be in love. We all fall in love, and that's how we have babies and pass on generations. But here's the problem. He's married. He's twice her age. And in the movie, he has a beard, and I really don't like guys with beards. And he has 2 children and 1 on the way. His wife's name is Elizabeth Proctor, and she's a very sincere, nice, she's very tolerating for a wife, I would say. Because she knows that John and Abigail had a thing. Now, whoa, what are you talking about? So what happened was Elizabeth was sick for a while. And you know when it gets to like your 10th year of marriage, of course I wouldn't know, but ask your parents. When you get to the 10th year of marriage, that kind of heat kind of dies down, and it's just kind of like you're lying on the opposite sides of the bed, kind of not interacting. Plus, Elizabeth was sick. And of course, as a human being, as a man, and as a beast, as the people back then would say, John Proctor needed satisfaction. And I'm pretty sure you know what I'm talking about. But he can't do it with a sick wife who's lying in bed all the time. So he needs someone to, kind of play around with. So guess who he chooses? His servant, Abigail Williams. Now, most of the girls at this time were very inferior. This was a time when men were considered like everything. They were the head of the family and they did everything. The women just stayed at home, took care of the kids, made food. They were basically just something to take advantage of. And John basically took advantage of Abigail. And Abigail, being, I think, 17 and very naive, she fell for that. And she thought that John actually loved her when he really just needed her for satisfaction. So that's going to become a huge issue, especially towards the trials in Acts 3 and 4. And that's where things start to get really fun. So back to the dance party. So because Abigail was in deep love with John Proctor, what she did was she was going to kill Elizabeth Proctor. And because Reverend Parris saw this, what happened was, while everyone was being accused of witchcraft, Reverend Parris went to go talk with Abigail. And he's like, hey, weren't you dancing? I saw you in the forest. And of course, I was like, what? What are you talking about? No. And this is where the theme of the value of a name comes in. And it'll also come in Act 4 too with John Proctor. But it also comes in because she doesn't want her name to be ruined. Because, well, first, if her name is ruined, then no one's going to believe her and her accusations. And 2, she's going to ruin the Parris family name. 3, if she does that, then she's going to fail at her plan to kill Elizabeth Proctor. So what happens is she accuses, after being pressured by Reverend Hale, by Reverend Parris, and by the Putnams, and the Putnams are sort of kind of important, I wouldn't say very crucial to the story, but the mother, Anne Putnam, all of her kids died except for one, and Ruth Putnam. So the thing is that Ruth is lying in bed as well as Betty. And because of that, the Putnam family accuses everyone of witchcraft because, how can 8 children die? How can 7 children die? It can't be just a coincidence. So the Putnams are thinking that there's some kind of mad witchcraft going on in Salem. And that is something that kind of riles up the trials as well. And so with all this pressure on Abigail, Abby says, Tituba did it. So Tituba is like, what are you talking about, you little So she gets infuriated, but it doesn't matter because her opinions don't really count in this society. Oh, and this is the part where you're just like, oh my god. She accuses Sarah Good of witchcraft. She says, Tituba confesses. She's like, I was with the devil, and she says something about the temptation of winning the white man. And that is such an important concept, especially because it was in a black and white society. And she said, the devil said he has the white man in his hand. And she says that is what tempted her to work with the devil. And so she accuses Sarah Good. And who is Sarah Good? So Sarah Good is a really old lady. She's in her 60s, and she's portrayed in the movie as really fat, ugly, really useless maid. And Sarah Good, so she's old and she's pregnant. She's a widow. So she's viewed as the really, really low class, the useless class that you can just accuse and you won't receive any repercussions. So let's say that Tituba accused John Proctor. She's gonna have some problems because Proctor was a well-living farmer and he had a good reputation in the village. But because she accused someone as poor as Sarah Good, she got away with it. So starting with Sarah Good, so many more accusations were made by Abigail and by Mary Warren. Now, Mary Warren is a servant that works in the Proctor household. And Abigail used to work under John, but now she got out, and then Mary Warren is now in it. Now, Mary Warren is a very, very timid girl, and she cannot lie. So she's really easily influenced by her surroundings. And that's going to become a huge thing at the trials. So now I'm talking about all of these things that are going to be really important at the trials, and you're like probably sitting in your seat being like, why isn't she actually talking about the trials? So here we go. After all of these people are accused, turns out, who else is accused? Rebecca Nurse. Now, who is Rebecca Nurse? She is the only person who knows the truth about witchcraft. And the whole village is relying on her to uncover witchcraft. And why is she accused of witchcraft? Well, it's probably one of Abby and her girls. So Rebecca Nurse is accused. Who else is accused? John Proctor is accused. Who else is accused? Elizabeth Proctor is accused. So at first it built from the lowest society, lowest class, and it slowly starts building up, little by little, to this huge eruption of useless, absolutely unreasonable accusations that you would go like, what are they doing? Like, can you please like tell the truth? Because I'm a person of my word, and I really hate it when people break promises. So this was even more infuriating for me because like, he didn't do anything wrong, especially when Elizabeth Proctor got accused. I was so mad. So how did Elizabeth Proctor get accused? Like, what did she ever do? She's a very honest and innocent woman. So how did she get accused? Well, who do you think? Yeah, you're right, Abigail. So what Abigail did was, they were at church, and Mary was making a puppet for her, and a puppet is just a little doll, another word for a little doll that you hand make. So she was making her puppet, and Abigail was sitting right beside her, right? And then she sees Mary Warren making the puppet. Sorry, I just dropped my book. She sees Mary Warren making the puppet for Elizabeth Proctor, and she says, hey, she's making it for Elizabeth Proctor, so Elizabeth Proctor is going to have that puppet later on, and that might be to my good use. So Abby, oh my god, she really pisses me off when she does this. So she sees that Mary Warren puts the needle in for safekeeping, because of course when you're done with either stitching something or making something, you stick in the needle to make sure it's not going to get loose or like get dangerous or anything, right? So she sees Mary put in the needle, and Abby does the most insane thing that anyone would do. She stabs herself. Now, why does she do this? Like, why would you ever do that? And remember, this is all for John Proctor's love. Now, is this really worth it? I don't think so, but apparently Abigail Williams thinks so. So, why is this important? So, the night that Abby stabs herself, Reverend Hale and Cheever and all of the important townspeople go to the Proctor house. And they say, Elizabeth Proctor is accused of murder. Like, okay. So Abby stabbed herself, right? But Elizabeth is accused of stabbing her, of murdering her, of using witchcraft to send her spirits at her. Like, what is this? So Elizabeth Proctor is infuriated, and John Proctor is going mad now. He's like, okay, Abby, you need to stop this. I don't love you, and I said it too many times for you to not get hurt. Like, why aren't you getting hurt? You should just give up if I say I don't like you. I don't love you. I was just using you. I was just using you like a stallion, and stallion becomes a huge symbol. So, what stallion means is, okay, this is gonna be a little bit inappropriate, maybe a little bit sexual. So, what happens is there's this line that Abby says, and this was when John Proctor and Abby were kind of fighting over the whole "do you love me not" issue. And Abby was like, I remember when you grabbed my back like a stallion. And so basically, it's getting hot in here. So that Abby meant that he basically uses her as an animal, as an object for him to satisfy himself. And that is I actually really like it. And if you watch the movie, you'll see that in almost every single scene where John comes out, John will have his stallion next to him. Hey, you see that connection? So there are really little things that the movie director puts in there that most people don't notice. Plainly because they're not paying attention, they think the movie's boring, they think the plot is boring, they just don't like witchcraft, they're not Christian, whatever. They have these reasons, but you really need to catch those little bits of symbolism. So moving on from the white stallion, So we are at the courts now. I'm not going to explain every single part of it. I'm going to explain the parts where it's either important or I like. So I really like this part where, okay, so Abby and John are together, and this is in Act 3, or like towards the end of the book. So what happens is, John Proctor, in order to stop Abby's madness, he decides, okay, I'm just going to confess. Confess to what? Confess to adultery. Now, why is this a huge deal? Well, first, he's going to ruin his name very badly. Second, he just broke a commandment. He is going to get executed. He's going to get hanged publicly. What's the third problem? He has a family. He has a baby that hasn't been born yet. And he needs to support them, but what is he going to do? And women weren't allowed to work at this time. So it's pretty self-explanatory that the whole Proctor household is going to die if he hangs. So Proctor has two choices. He can either confess to witchcraft, or he can confess to adultery. Not too many options there, right? So after this is almost the final scene in Act 4, where he admits it. He says, okay, you know what? I want to live. I want my life. And it's a really crucial line. He says, I want my life to Elizabeth. And then Elizabeth's like, okay, then go confess yourself to witchcraft. And this is what Hale has been asking him to do. This is what Parris has been asking him to do. This is what the whole town, even the judge has been pushing him to do. Oh yeah, and Judge Danforth, he's really important. He's the deputy governor of the entire Massachusetts, not just Salem. So he's a very, very high person. Anyways, so he's pushing him to do that. And Proctor said, okay, I'll commit to witchcraft. So there's a scene, and in the movie, this is a very emotional scene. So John Proctor is there, and he has this paper in front of him. And then Judge Danforth, he says, sign this. We need hard proof. The citizens of Salem, everyone needs hard proof that you were committing witchcraft and not adultery. They're not going to believe you if you just say it. We can't record you. This is so long ago. Like, that's not going to work. He says, we need written proof so we can post it on the church wall. This is where the value of a name comes back. So most of us take our names for granted. And what I mean by that is, we honestly don't know what the government is doing. The government is probably seeing this video right now. Hello, White House. Hello, President Trump. That's gonna get hard to get used to. So, okay, where was I? Oh yeah, so, you just kind of ruined my flow. So at this crucial moment, this is like the climax of the Crucible. John Proctor goes up, he's about to sign it. Actually, he signs it. He commits to witchcraft, and then he thinks. He's like, no wait, this is not right. And he gives a very, very, very emotional speech at the end of Act 4. And he says, I'm going to read it to you because it's such an important line. Because it is my name, because I cannot have another in my life, because I lie and sign myself to lies, because I am not worth the dust on the feet of them that hang. How may I live without my name? I have given you my soul. Leave me my name. And that is what Proctor says when Danforth says, we need proof. So Proctor chooses his life over his dignity, and he says, I will hang. I am not going to raise my children having dirtied my name. So if he signs this, what's going to happen is the whole town is going to know that he committed witchcraft. The whole town's going to know all of his sins, including adultery. Now John Proctor is saying, well, first of all, his pride hurts. His dignity is gone. Where is his honor as a farmer? No one's going to trust him. No one's going to buy stuff from him. He's going to be dirtied in the name. He's going to be as low as Sarah Good. He's saying, how can I trust myself? How can I believe myself? How can I put myself to the responsibility of my children who are innocent? My children will be accused of this. My children will be considered witches. My children will be accused of adultery. How can I teach them to become men? How can I teach them to be good man of society when I am such a dirty man myself? And this is such an emotional moment in this play, and it's probably my favorite and probably most people's favorites. And John Proctor rips it up and he hangs. Now, this is one of many, not many, but one of the few novels that it's a tragedy where the main character dies. Now, here's the thing. Right now, after hearing all this, you might be like, oh, I want to kill Abigail Williams. Wait a minute. Why? If you think about it well, Abby is half John Proctor's age. And I mentioned this many times. John Proctor used her for his satisfaction. So why is Abby the one who should be getting all the hate? Right? So in our society right now, if I said that it's exactly like my friend's dad has a wife, right? And he has his own family, and he's my friend, and he's the dad of my friend. It's like saying he basically slept with me for his satisfaction. Who's the victim here? I am. Obviously, I am. Everyone's going to accuse the dad. They're going to hate the dad. But why is it in the Crucible that Abby is the one portrayed as the antagonist? Why is John Proctor the protagonist? Why is he the one making the good decision of sacrificing his life for his dignity? Why is he the good guy? He's the villain right here. He's the antagonist. Now, why is Abby viewed as the villain? Because her innocence, in a way, her naive personality drove her to accuse tens of innocent people. And that's what people think that makes Abby a bad person. Why does she do this in the first place? She did it because of John Proctor. So, in my point of view, I'm sorry if I disagree with Arthur Miller, because Miller puts a really heavy bias on John Proctor. Why? Because he's a man. And in the 1900s, it was obvious that a man is going to be preferred over a woman. So there's this heavy bias against against Abigail Williams for John Proctor. But for me, as I see it, Abby's the victim here, and yes, she is very insane, but as I see it, John Proctor was the one who made the wrong decision at the first time, in the beginning anyways. And so the value of a name, and that's I think I like that thing the most out of all of them. There's a lot of other things like honesty, vengeance, love, satisfaction, irony, but I like that one the best, the value of a name, because it applies to real life, modern day right now too. So like I said, the government might be watching this, and I don't know. And one of the other things is that if you didn't know, I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to be in shock, and you're going to search up the picture. So when you go to the airports, or when you go internationally, because I just recently went to China over the summer. So what they do is they make you step into this kind of like capsule thing, and then they scan your body fully. And you're thinking that just detects metal stuff. Oh, no. That is a picture of your naked body. Now, some people might be like, well, they're just doing it for they're doing it for safety issues. No, they're not. Like, yes, they are, but does that not matter to you that they're having a naked picture of you? And most of these people are men. And this applies for women too, but I'm kind of being sexually biased here because I am a girl myself. So when I heard of this from my English teacher, JG, I was like, oh, that makes me a little bit uncomfortable. And some of my classmates said, why is that a problem? Now, I'm one of those people, I guess in the Crucible, I would be the John Proctor. I would not sacrifice my name, maybe not for my life, but for someone important to me, I would not sacrifice my name. And one of the other things that kind of sacrifices our name is ratemyteachers.com. What ratemyteachers.com is most of you probably might have heard this. Hold on, I'm going to get out of the sun, it's like glaring in my eye. Okay, so ratemyteachers.com is a website where, well, it's basically self-explanatory, you can rate your teachers. But here's the bad thing about it. It's completely anonymous. Plus, you can just write random stuff on there. So my teacher, he's amazing. If you ever go to uni and you have Mr. Garcia, you have just fulfilled the goal of your 4 years of high school. He's the best. He makes the Crucible so fun. And so basically, he has like 5 stars, like no kidding. But there's this one comment that says, oh, I bet JG's taking drugs. Like, okay, so he's energetic, he's very up, and he's dancing all the time. So he's taking drugs. Where does that conclusion come from? Same with what Abby did. Like, where does that conclusion come from that Sarah Good did it, that this person did it, that Elizabeth was the one that killed you? And, like, where does that come from? And the stupid thing is that people believe that. And that just kind of drives me nuts. Because and I'm just going to make a modern day reference here, I love my English teacher, and thinking that people are going to accuse him of doing drugs, and this isn't just about my English teacher. Let's say, oh, I don't know, Miley Cyrus, you might have heard it, but you might have not. So every time you search on Miley Cyrus, the only thing that's going to come up is twerk, or wrecking ball, or nasty. And it's just going to remain with her entire life. Her children are going to see this, her grandchildren are going to see this. And this is just going to remain in her name. And I really think that this theme is really important and it applies to everyone, and no one thinks of it as important as I do. And this is the central theme of the Crucible. And I hope that my so-called rants with the Crucible have helped you in understanding this book. And if you have any questions, you can always feel free to comment or ask me. And put a lot of likes. And I hope that you will enjoy this book as well.